The most dangerous wars are never won with bullets. They are won with bloodlines, bonds, and the people no one believes matter. In the city of Blackridge, every alpha child grew up learning the same law before they could even read. Power came from blood, but authority came from bond. The Bond Recognition Act, signed nearly a century earlier after the Great Pact conflict, had become the foundation of modern Alpha and Omega society. It governed inheritance, territorial claims, political alliances, and even the legitimacy of Mafia leadership. Every major family obeyed it because without it, the endless cycle of Alpha wars would begin again. Damien Ashcroft had spent the last 12 years ensuring that peace never depended on mercy. At 31, he ruled the Ashcroft Syndicate with the quiet confidence of an apex alpha whose reputation reached far beyond city limits. Rivals respected him not because he was cruel, but because he never acted without purpose. Every negotiation was calculated. Every promise was honored. Every enemy knew exactly where they stood. Yet even Damien could not ignore the decree delivered by the Bloodline Tribunal that cold autumn morning. The Whitmore Syndicate had violated 3 territorial agreements, sabotaged 2 trade routes protected under Pact law, and pushed both organizations to the edge of another Mafia conflict. Thousands of civilians living inside neutral districts depended on the fragile ceasefire remaining intact. Under the compact of Bloodline unity, only one legal solution remained: a political marriage between the ruling Alpha of one family and an unmarried Omega of the other. The decision wasn't optional. It carried the authority of every recognized pack in North America. Rejecting it meant automatic exile from the Bond Registry, the loss of legal Alpha status, and open season for rival organizations to seize territory without consequence. Damien accepted before his advisors could even argue. Duty had always outweighed personal desire. Across the city, however, the Whitmore estate erupted into outrage. Victor Whitmore, the family's ambitious alpha heir, refused to sacrifice his own carefully planned engagement to satisfy an ancient law. Instead, he offered someone the family had ignored for years: Rowan Whitmore, the youngest Omega, the forgotten son, the one servants whispered about whenever they thought no one was listening. Useless, weak, a burden that contributed nothing to the family's future. Rowan had heard those words since childhood. He knew every variation by heart. Too quiet, too fragile, no useful instincts, no political value. Even his official bloodline assessment labeled him as an Omega with negligible influence potential. His father had stopped inviting him to family meetings years ago. His older brother barely acknowledged his existence unless another sacrifice was required. So when Victor informed him he would marry Damien Ashcroft within 48 hours, Rowan simply lowered his eyes and nodded. Refusing would accomplish nothing except bringing shame upon the few household staff members who had ever shown him kindness. The cathedral chosen for the ceremony stood on neutral territory between both Mafia domains, its ancient stone walls older than the laws that now governed them. Hundreds of alphas filled the wooden pews in tailored black suits, their pheromones restrained by tribunal regulations, but their hostility impossible to hide. Betas occupied the outer aisles as legal witnesses. Omega representatives from recognized families sat together beneath silver banners bearing the crest of the Bond Registry. The atmosphere felt less like a wedding and more like the signing of a peace treaty. Damien entered first, every step measured, every expression unreadable. His charcoal suit bore the Ashcroft crest embroidered over his heart, symbolizing leadership accepted through lawful bond rather than inherited privilege alone. Moments later, Rowan appeared at the opposite end of the aisle. His simple ivory suit lacked expensive embroidery, making him seem almost invisible against the grandeur surrounding him. Conversations faded into uncomfortable silence before quiet murmurs spread across the hall. That is the Whitmore Omega? They sacrificed him? The useless one? Damien heard every whispered judgment without turning his head. Rowan heard them too, though years of practice kept his expression perfectly calm. As Rowan finally reached the altar, the High Arbiter opened the ceremonial registry and spoke the words every Alpha and Omega recognized. Today this union preserves peace until destiny itself decides whether law becomes bond. For the briefest moment, Damien glanced toward the Omega standing beside him. Rowan looked smaller than the stories had suggested, but there was something unexpected in his silver blue eyes. They held neither fear nor resentment, only quiet acceptance, as though he had spent his entire life preparing to disappear so others could survive. Damien found that strangely unsettling. Somewhere beyond the cathedral walls, church bells echoed across Blackridge as two rival bloodlines became one household by law, while beneath the polished marble floor, unseen by everyone present, the ancient symbols carved into the foundation of the Bond Registry gave off the faintest pulse of light before falling silent once more. The Ashcroft estate overlooked the northern cliffs of Blackridge like a fortress built to outlast generations, its stone walls carrying the history of every alpha who had ruled before Damien. Rowan crossed the threshold quietly, accompanied only by a senior beta steward who explained the household customs with practiced precision. Every corridor reflected discipline rather than luxury. Portraits of former leaders lined the walls beside framed copies of the Bloodline Compact and the Bond Recognition Act, reminders that this house valued law above emotion. Damien walked several steps ahead, without once looking back, not out of cruelty, but because distance felt safer than pretending a political marriage had suddenly become something personal. When they reached the private residential wing, he finally stopped before two identical doors facing one another across a long hallway illuminated by afternoon sunlight. "The room on the left is yours," he said calmly. "No one will enter without your permission. If you require anything, speak with Mrs. Holloway. She manages this household better than I ever could." Rowan nodded softly. "Thank you." There was no warmth in the exchange, but there was no contempt either, and after years inside the Whitmore estate, simple respect felt strangely unfamiliar. During the following weeks they settled into an uneasy routine. Damien left before sunrise to oversee negotiations, inspections, and meetings with PAC representatives. Rowan spent most mornings inside the estate library, discovering shelves filled with legal records, historical journals, and old tribunal decisions that even university archives could not access. The staff remained courteous but cautious, unsure how to treat an Omega whose marriage existed only because the law demanded it. Meals were shared out of protocol rather than companionship. Conversations rarely lasted longer than a minute. Some evenings silence filled the dining room so completely that the ticking of an antique clock sounded louder than their breathing. Yet neither of them seemed eager to change the arrangement. It was peaceful, predictable, and emotionally safe. Exactly 21 days after the wedding, Rowan accepted an invitation from Mrs. Holloway to organize several unopened storage rooms beneath the West Wing. Dust-covered forgotten cabinets containing generations of legal documents no longer needed for daily administration. While sorting old ledgers into labeled crates, Rowan noticed a weathered leather portfolio bearing the silver seal of the Bond Registry. Curious, he carefully unfolded the brittle pages. Most described obsolete legal procedures until one paragraph immediately captured his attention. It referenced Article 90, a provision quietly added after the Great PAC conflict, but rarely discussed in public. According to the statute, political marriages recognized by the tribunal remained provisional for 90 days. If no authentic bond manifested naturally during that period, the union could be declared administratively complete, yet biologically unrecognized. Such couples retained certain legal responsibilities, but permanently lost eligibility to establish a hereditary alpha succession together. More importantly, rival claimants could challenge territorial agreements originally secured through the marriage. Rowan read the paragraph 3 times before his pulse quickened. Suddenly Victor's willingness to sacrifice him no longer seemed irrational. If Victor already knew the marriage would fail to awaken a bond, then the ceasefire would collapse exactly 3 months later. The Ashcroft syndicate would appear legally weakened, while the Whitmore family could accuse Damien of failing the compact and reopen every territorial dispute before the tribunal. Rowan quietly copied the article into a notebook before returning the original document to its shelf. That evening he waited until dinner before speaking. "Did your legal advisors ever mention the 90-day review?" Damien looked up from his untouched coffee. "What review?" Rowan slid the copied passage across the table. Damien read it once, then again much more slowly. His composed expression barely shifted, but Rowan noticed the subtle tightening of his jaw. "Only a handful of tribunal lawyers know this amendment exists," Damien said. "Where did you find it?" "In your archive," silence settled between them again, though this time it carried tension rather than distance. Damien closed the notebook and stared toward the rain falling beyond the dining room windows. If Victor planned this from the beginning, then the wedding was never meant to prevent war. It was meant to delay it until the law worked in his favor. Rowan lowered his eyes. I believe that was always the plan. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Yet something invisible had shifted. They were no longer simply strangers sharing the same roof because politics demanded it. For the first time since standing together at the altar, they faced the same problem instead of merely living beside one another. While somewhere inside the vast network of tribunal offices, official calendars quietly continued counting down the remaining days until the provisional marriage would be judged. The discovery hidden inside the forgotten archive refused to leave Damien's thoughts. For the next several days, every meeting with tribunal representatives, every strategy session with his advisors, and every report arriving from neutral territories carried the same unanswered question. Had the Ashcroft Syndicate walked willingly into a carefully constructed legal trap? The calendar continued moving toward the 90-day review, and for the first time in years Damien found himself studying laws instead of battle maps. Rowan noticed the change immediately. The Alpha, who usually carried absolute certainty, now spent late evenings surrounded by legal books spread across the library table. Yet every official record they examined ended at the same frustrating conclusion. Authentic bonds could never be forced by law, manipulated by contracts, or manufactured through political pressure. They either awakened naturally or they never existed at all. One quiet afternoon, Mrs. Holloway asked Rowan to deliver several restored family records to the Eastern Archive, a circular chamber built beneath an enormous stained glass dome that flooded the room with shifting colors as sunlight crossed the sky. Unlike the formal library, this place preserved documents too fragile for ordinary scholars. Ancient maps, handwritten journals, and the original registry books rested inside climate-controlled glass cabinets. Rowan carefully carried the records between towering shelves before suddenly stopping in the middle of the room. A strange sensation settled over him. It was not pain, nor fear, nor excitement. Instead, it resembled hearing distant music that no one else seemed able to notice. Invisible threads appeared to hum gently beneath the silence. Rowan closed his eyes instinctively. The sensation grew stronger. Somewhere beyond the walls, countless unseen connections pulsed like quiet heartbeats. Some felt steady. Others trembled weakly. A few simply ended. He inhaled slowly until the strange chorus finally faded. When he opened his eyes, Damien was standing several feet away watching him with obvious concern. "Are you feeling unwell?" Damien asked. Rowan hesitated. For years he had hidden experiences like this because every attempt to explain them had only earned ridicule from his own family. Victor had called them childish fantasies. Tutors insisted they were symptoms of an overly imaginative Omega. Physicians recorded them as harmless stress responses. Eventually, Rowan stopped mentioning them entirely. "It happened again," he admitted softly. "Again?" Damien asked. Rowan nodded. "Sometimes I hear something that cannot actually be heard. It feels like connections between people, not conversations. More like echoes." Damien remained silent, allowing Rowan to continue without interruption. "When I was a child, I told my father that two neighboring alphas would end their partnership before anyone else knew they were arguing. 3 weeks later, their bond was legally dissolved. I once warned a servant that his mate was seriously ill after hearing one of those echoes become faint overnight. They found her unconscious the following morning." Rowan looked almost embarrassed by his own words. "Everyone said I was inventing stories." Damien did not laugh. Instead, he asked the one question no one had ever bothered asking. "Has it always been accurate?" Rowan thought carefully before answering. "Not always. I cannot understand everything I sense. But whenever those echoes become distorted, something important usually changes." Damien slowly walked toward one of the oldest display cases where the original founders of the Bond Registry had recorded observations nearly 100 years earlier. A single sentence caught his attention. Certain Omega bloodlines possess heightened resonance perception, allowing them to recognize instability within established bonds before conventional biological indicators become visible. The notation had been dismissed decades earlier as folklore because no verified cases remained. Damien looked back toward Rowan. "You are not imagining this." Rowan blinked in surprise. Damien pointed silently toward the faded journal resting beneath the glass. Together they read every fragile page describing rare Omega families capable of sensing fluctuations inside the invisible network connecting recognized bonds throughout society. Most bloodlines carrying the ability had disappeared generations earlier during political conflicts and changing inheritance laws. Rowan's breathing became unsteady as forgotten childhood memories surfaced, his mother whispering that some gifts were safer when hidden. A silver pendant she insisted he never remove until the day she mysteriously vanished from public life. The repeated warnings never to reveal what he sometimes perceived. Damien finally understood why the Whitmore family had labeled Rowan useless instead of extraordinary. An Omega capable of recognizing authentic bonds could expose forged claims, fraudulent inheritances, and fabricated political alliances that powerful families depended upon. Such an ability threatened far more than personal reputations. It threatened the entire balance of authority within Alpha and Omega society. As late afternoon sunlight poured through the stained glass ceiling, scattering blue and silver reflections across the archive floor, Damien looked at Rowan differently than ever before. He no longer saw a forgotten Omega abandoned by his own family. He saw someone carrying a truth dangerous enough that an influential bloodline might spend years convincing the world he had no value at all. The revelation inside the Eastern Archive changed more than Damien expected. Instead of dismissing Rowan's unusual perception as superstition, he quietly arranged a meeting with the only person outside the Ashcroft Syndicate he still trusted completely. Elias Mercer, a respected beta attorney specializing in bond law, arrived at the estate carrying 3 locked cases filled with tribunal records that ordinary citizens were never permitted to examine. As evening settled over Blackridge, the 3 of them gathered inside a private conference room where every window had been sealed for confidentiality. Elias listened without interrupting as Rowan carefully described the strange echoes he sensed whenever established bonds became unstable. Rather than looking skeptical, the attorney slowly removed a faded legal journal from one of his cases. There have always been rumors about resonance perception, Elias explained. The tribunal officially considers it an extinct Omega trait because no verified cases have appeared in decades. If Rowan truly possesses it, his existence alone could overturn countless legal decisions. Damien folded his arms. How? Elias opened the journal to a collection of disciplinary rulings. Because our entire legal system assumes the Bond Registry is accurate. Every inheritance, every territorial agreement, every pact succession depends on those records being authentic. If someone discovered a method to create false bond certifications, only a resonance Omega would recognize the deception before biological evidence appeared. The room fell silent. Rowan suddenly remembered the strange vibrations he had sensed while attending the wedding ceremony weeks earlier. They had not all sounded alike. Some invisible connections had felt natural and calm, while others seemed strangely hollow, almost as though they were empty shells pretending to be something real. I think I have already heard them, Rowan whispered. Both men turned toward him. At the cathedral, Rowan continued. Some bonds felt different. I thought I was imagining it because everyone else acted normally. Elias exchanged a cautious glance with Damien before closing the journal. Then we need proof. 2 days later, an official invitation arrived from the Bloodline Tribunal announcing a regional leadership assembly. Every recognized Mafia family would attend to review territorial agreements established after the recent political marriage. Damien accepted immediately and requested Rowan accompany him as his lawful spouse, a decision that surprised nearly every advisor within the Ashcroft Syndicate. The assembly hall occupied the upper floors of the historic tribunal building, where marble columns supported an enormous domed ceiling engraved with the crests of every registered pack. Representatives filled the chamber in carefully arranged rows according to legal status. At the center sat the governing council led by Silas Voss, an influential alpha whose reputation for protecting bloodline law had earned widespread respect throughout the country. His calm voice carried easily across the hall as he welcomed every delegation and praised the stability supposedly achieved through the tribunal's guidance. Rowan quietly observed the gathering while trying to ignore the faint chorus beginning to stir inside his mind. Invisible threads stretched across the chamber connecting Alpha and Omega pairs seated together. Most glowed with the same quiet harmony he had sensed before. Then his attention shifted towards several council members standing beside Silas. The echoes surrounding them sounded wrong. They pulsed unevenly, as if forced into rhythm rather than naturally existing. Rowan instinctively reached for the edge of Damien's sleeve. Damien looked down immediately. "What is it?" Rowan spoke so softly that only Damien could hear. "Some of those bonds are not real." Damien remained perfectly still despite the shock threatening to show on his face. Rowan carefully identified 3 different pairs without naming them aloud. Each produced the same hollow resonance. Damien watched as Silas confidently certified another territorial agreement based upon one of those recognized bonds. The applause filling the chamber suddenly felt unsettling. If Rowan was correct, then official authority itself had begun resting upon fabricated foundations. The meeting concluded without incident, yet neither Damien nor Rowan spoke during the drive home. Back inside the estate library, Damien finally broke the silence. "You identified 3 separate false bonds among the highest officials in the tribunal." Rowan nodded uneasily. "I wish I were mistaken." Damien slowly placed the assembly records onto the table. "If those certifications are fraudulent, someone inside the tribunal is protecting them." Elias arrived shortly afterward carrying additional registry files. After comparing dates, signatures, and authorization codes late into the night, one name appeared repeatedly across every suspicious approval. Silas Voss. The respected guardian of Bloodline law had personally authorized each questionable certification over the past 6 years. For the first time, Damien understood the true scale of the danger surrounding them. The conspiracy had never been limited to rival Mafia families. It had quietly taken root inside the very institution responsible for deciding which bonds were genuine and which futures would shape the balance of Alpha and Omega society. The investigation remained hidden from everyone outside the Ashcroft estate, yet the weight of the secret changed the rhythm of each passing day. Damien quietly reassigned trusted advisors, restricted access to sensitive legal files, and ordered every communication with the Bloodline Tribunal to be documented twice. If Silas Voss truly controlled fraudulent bond certifications, then any careless move could expose Rowan before they understood the full extent of the conspiracy. Rowan noticed the extra security, but said nothing. Instead, he devoted himself to studying the old registry journals alongside Elias Mercer, searching for forgotten cases involving resonance perception. Every page revealed the same unsettling pattern. Rare Omega bloodlines with unusual abilities had gradually disappeared from public records decades earlier, not because they had vanished naturally, but because official documentation had quietly erased them from legal history. One rainy afternoon, Damien received an invitation from the Chamber of Neutral Commerce, a gathering where recognized Mafia leaders renewed transportation agreements protected under PAC law. Attendance was mandatory for every ruling Alpha. Although Rowan was not required to accompany him, Damien surprised everyone by asking, "Come with me. If your perception notices something again, I want you there." Rowan hesitated only briefly before agreeing. It was the first invitation Damien had offered that sounded less like an obligation and more like trust. The chamber overlooked the city's central harbor through towering glass windows where gray clouds reflected across the water. Representatives from every major syndicate filled the hall, while legal observers reviewed contracts that affected thousands of workers living inside neutral territories. The atmosphere appeared calm, but Rowan immediately sensed the familiar echoes surrounding dozens of established bonds. Most resonated with quiet harmony. Then another disturbance reached him. Unlike the false bonds he had recognized before, this one felt sharp and unstable, pulsing with unnatural urgency. Rowan slowly turned toward a balcony overlooking the main floor. A visitor wearing the insignia of an independent brokerage stood alone, pretending to study the harbor. Everything about the stranger appeared ordinary except for the strange emptiness surrounding him. Rowan instinctively reached toward Damien's arm. "Something feels wrong," he whispered. Damien followed Rowan's gaze without drawing attention. "Can you explain it?" Rowan shook his head. "No. But whatever I am sensing is getting closer." Moments later, one of Damien's senior advisors approached with an unexpected request to review revised transportation documents in a private conference room. The timing felt strangely convenient. As the group walked toward the hallway, Rowan stopped abruptly. The invisible echoes around the mysterious visitor suddenly collapsed into complete silence. Every instinct told him the silence itself was the warning. Damien, wait. His voice carried just enough urgency to stop the alpha before he entered the room. Damien trusted Rowan's expression immediately. Instead of crossing the doorway, he stepped aside and instructed his security detail to inspect the conference room first. Less than a minute later, the officers returned after discovering sophisticated surveillance equipment hidden behind decorative wall panels and forged legal documents already placed on the conference table bearing Damien's signature. Nothing inside posed immediate physical danger, but the trap was obvious. Had Damien entered and signed routine paperwork inside the compromised room, fabricated records could have been presented before the tribunal as evidence that he knowingly approved illegal territorial transfers. The chamber administrators launched an internal investigation at once while the unknown visitor quietly disappeared into the departing crowd before anyone realized he had been connected to the deception. During the drive back through the rain-soaked streets, Damien remained unusually quiet before finally speaking. You prevented something that could have destroyed everything my family has built. Rowan looked toward the passing city lights. I only listened. Damien smiled faintly for the first time since their marriage. Most people only hear words. You hear truth. When they returned to the Ashcroft estate, several household staff members witnessed Damien instinctively opening the front door for Rowan instead of walking inside. First, a simple gesture that did not go unnoticed. Rumors spread quickly through both syndicates that the distant political marriage had begun changing into genuine mutual respect. Across the city, however, Victor Whitmore received confirmation that his carefully arranged legal trap had failed once again. Rather than expressing frustration, he simply folded the report and looked toward the skyline with quiet confidence. If deception could no longer separate Damien and Rowan, then the next stage of the plan would have to ensure that the entire tribunal questioned whether the Ashcroft marriage deserved recognition at all. The official notice arrived exactly 83 days after the wedding, delivered beneath the silver seal of the Bloodline Tribunal. The provisional marriage review would take place at sunrise 3 days later, leaving Damien and Rowan with almost no time to prepare. According to the tribunal, the hearing existed only to determine whether their union satisfied every legal requirement established under the Bloodline Compact. In reality, Damien understood the proceeding carried far greater consequences. If Victor and Silas succeeded in convincing the council that no authentic bond existed, the political marriage would lose its authority as the foundation of peace between the Ashcroft and Whitmore syndicates. Every territorial agreement signed since the ceremony could immediately be challenged. The evening before the hearing, Damien found Rowan standing alone beneath the stained glass dome of the Eastern Archive, where they had first uncovered the truth about resonance perception. Colored light covered the marble floor in shifting patterns as silence settled comfortably between them. You have done more for my family than anyone expected, Damien said quietly. Rowan smiled faintly without looking away from the glass ceiling. Your family accepted me before I believed I deserved it. Damien considered those words carefully. No, they accepted you because they learned who you truly are. I simply happened to learn first. Rowan lowered his eyes, surprised by the sincerity in Damien's voice. What had begun as a political obligation had gradually become trust built through shared choices, long nights studying forgotten laws, and countless moments when neither had allowed the other to stand alone. The next morning, the tribunal chamber filled long before the hearing began. Representatives from recognized PACs occupied every seat, while legal observers recorded each statement for the National Registry. Victor Whitmore appeared perfectly composed, offering polite greetings that concealed quiet confidence. Across the chamber, Silas Voss presided over the proceedings with the same calm authority that had earned him respect for years. Elias Mercer organized legal documents beside Damien, while Rowan remained quietly at his husband's side. As opening testimony concluded, Victor requested permission to challenge the validity of the marriage under Article 90. He argued that despite 86 days of lawful union, no biological evidence demonstrated the existence of an authentic bond. Therefore, he claimed, the tribunal should prepare to dissolve the political protections established by the marriage once the review period expired. Murmurs spread across the chamber. Silas nodded thoughtfully before inviting Damien to respond. Damien stepped forward without raising his voice. The compact exists to preserve peace through truth, not appearances. If this tribunal seeks the truth, then every certification involved in these proceedings should first be examined for authenticity. Silas's expression remained controlled, but his eyes briefly narrowed. Before he could answer, Rowan suddenly felt the familiar chorus surrounding the chamber begin to change. Invisible echoes that had remained distant for weeks grew clearer than ever before. Countless bonds resonated around him, yet one sound rose above all the others. It was steady, warm, and unmistakably connected to the alpha standing beside him. Rowan instinctively looked toward Damien at the exact same moment Damien turned toward him. Neither spoke. They simply held each other's gaze as an unexpected warmth spread through the quiet space between them. Several tribunal observers noticed a faint silver light forming around the ceremonial bands each had worn since the wedding. The light intensified slowly rather than explosively, weaving together like two streams meeting peacefully instead of colliding. Gasps echoed across the chamber as ancient symbols engraved into the courtroom floor began glowing in perfect harmony with the radiance surrounding Damien and Rowan. The High Arbiter immediately rose from his seat. "Stand where you are," he instructed, his voice carrying through the silent hall. Court historians hurried toward the central dais carrying the original Bond Register. As the centuries-old volume was opened, new writing appeared across its blank verification page without a single hand touching the parchment. The High Arbiter read the inscription aloud. Authentic bond recognized under the authority of the Bloodline Compact. Mutual trust established through lawful choice. Registry confirmed. Absolute silence followed. No witness had ever seen the registry record a bond in real time. Victor's confidence disappeared as the legal meaning became undeniable. Under tribunal law, once an authentic bond received direct recognition from the registry itself, no family, council member, or political rival possessed the authority to separate the bonded pair or invalidate the protections attached to their union. Damien gently reached for Rowan's hand, not because tradition required it, but because the choice now belonged entirely to them. For the first time since they had stood together at the altar, their marriage was no longer sustained by obligation, fear, or political necessity. It had become something even the oldest laws in Alpha and Omega society could only acknowledge, never create. The extraordinary recognition recorded inside the ancient Bond Register transformed the tribunal chamber from a place of legal debate into the center of a political crisis. News traveled through Blackridge before the hearing had even officially ended. For the first time in generations, an authentic bond had been witnessed and confirmed directly by the registry itself rather than through ordinary biological examinations. While many celebrated the event as proof that the old laws still carried integrity, others immediately recognized the danger. Every suspicious certification approved during the previous 6 years would now face renewed scrutiny. Damien and Rowan returned to the Ashcroft estate surrounded by increased security, not because they expected celebration, but because Elias Mercer warned them that people benefiting from fraudulent bonds would have every reason to protect the existing system. His concern proved justified sooner than anyone expected. Before sunrise the following morning, emergency notices arrived from multiple tribunal districts reporting coordinated disruptions inside regional bond registry offices. Archived verification ledgers had disappeared, communication networks between local registries had been severed, and several officials responsible for preserving historical bond records had abruptly resigned without explanation. None of the reports described violence, yet together they revealed something far more alarming. Someone was attempting to erase the documentary foundation upon which the entire bond system depended. Elias spread dozens of reports across the conference table inside the Ashcroft library. "This is not random," he said quietly. "Every affected office stores duplicate verification records. If enough copies disappear, future challenges will become impossible to resolve." Damien studied the map marking each incident. The pattern connected every major city where Silas Voss had personally authorized disputed bond certifications. Rowan suddenly felt the familiar resonance stirring beneath the silence. The countless invisible connections he had learned to recognize seemed restless, as though uncertainty itself had begun spreading through the network linking packs across the country. "People are afraid," Rowan whispered. "The echoes are changing everywhere." Damien looked toward him immediately. "Can you tell where it is strongest?" Rowan closed his eyes for several long moments before pointing toward the eastern district overlooking the river. "The Central Archive." Elias's expression darkened. "That is where the Master Bond Registry is preserved. Every authentic certification is copied there before entering the national record." Without hesitation, Damien organized a legal delegation rather than an armed convoy. Senior attorneys, tribunal observers loyal to procedural integrity, respected beta administrators, and representatives from neutral packs all agreed to accompany him. If they arrived with soldiers, the crisis could be portrayed as a mafia power struggle. If they arrived with lawful witnesses, every discovery would become part of the official record. By late afternoon, they reached the immense registry archive, a circular stone building whose vaulted interior contained towering shelves of carefully preserved ledgers extending upward beneath a magnificent glass dome. Sunlight streamed through the transparent ceiling, illuminating thousands of silver-bound volumes that represented generations of recognized bonds. Rowan stopped in the center of the hall as the invisible chorus surrounding him intensified beyond anything he had ever experienced. Every authentic bond resonated like distant stars, yet beneath that harmony another disturbance spread through the archive. It was not the sound of broken connections. It felt like carefully rewritten ones. Elias hurried toward the central catalog desk, where registry clerks nervously compared inventory logs. Entire sections of verification indexes had been reorganized overnight under emergency authorization carrying Silas Voss's official seal. Damien requested immediate access to the authorization orders, but the supervising administrator admitted that the original directives had already been transferred to confidential review. Before anyone could respond, the archive's automated preservation system activated unexpectedly. Massive protective shutters began sliding across the glass dome above, gradually dimming the brilliant afternoon light. The sudden darkness unsettled everyone inside. Rowan looked upward as the final beams of sunlight faded behind reinforced panels. For a brief moment, the countless silver volumes lining the circular walls reflected faint shimmering patterns that only he seemed able to perceive. The invisible network connecting authentic bonds across the nation appeared like constellations suspended within the archive itself, but several sections flickered uncertainly, as though someone had begun rewriting the sky one star at a time. Damien followed Rowan's gaze without fully understanding what he saw, yet he trusted Rowan's instincts completely now. Standing together beneath the darkened dome, they realized the struggle ahead was no longer about protecting their own marriage. It had become a race to preserve the truth of every legitimate bond before the foundation of Alpha and Omega society could be quietly rewritten beyond recognition. The silence inside the Master Bond Registry felt heavier than any courtroom Rowan had ever entered. Thousands of silver-bound ledgers surrounded the delegation in perfect circles, preserving the legal history of generations of Alpha and Omega families. Yet beneath their orderly appearance, Rowan could sense the invisible network trembling with growing instability. The authentic bonds still resonated with quiet harmony, but entire sections had begun fading into uncertainty, as though someone had carefully replaced truth with convincing imitation. Damien remained beside him, saying nothing. He had learned that Rowan never spoke carelessly when those echoes appeared. Elias Mercer requested immediate authorization to inspect the restricted historical vault beneath the archive, arguing that emergency preservation laws allowed independent legal review whenever the integrity of the registry itself was in question. The supervising administrator hesitated before reluctantly granting access under official observation. A narrow stone staircase descended into a climate-controlled chamber that very few people had entered in decades. Unlike the upper archive, this room contained original handwritten records predating the modern tribunal. At its center stood a single iron cabinet protected by multiple ceremonial seals bearing the insignia of the founding pacts. As the seals were lawfully removed, Rowan felt the strange resonance become almost overwhelming. Hidden inside the cabinet rested a small cedar box engraved with an unfamiliar crest. When the lid was carefully opened, it revealed an aged silver pendant, a single weathered journal, and one sealed envelope bearing the official crest of the Bloodline. Tribunal. No one spoke as Damien carefully lifted the unopened envelope from the cedar box. Rowan stared silently at the pendant. His breathing stopped for a moment. It was identical to the one his mother had placed around his neck as a child before warning him never to reveal what he could perceive. Elias carefully opened the weathered journal. Its fragile pages described a nearly forgotten Omega lineage whose members possessed an extraordinary gift known as bloodline resonance. Long before modern biological verification existed, these families had safeguarded the authenticity of political bonds throughout the nation. The journal never explained why the lineage disappeared, only that its absence permanently changed how the registry operated. Rowan slowly reached toward the journal as memories long buried returned with startling clarity. His mother had never spoken of ordinary family traditions. She had taught him to listen carefully whenever silence felt different. She had insisted that truth could always be heard before it could be proven. Elias looked toward Rowan with disbelief. Someone wanted this history to disappear, Elias said quietly. But the journal doesn't explain who or why. Before anyone could answer, Damien carefully examined the sealed envelope resting at the bottom of the cedar box. Across the front, elegant handwritten letters immediately drew everyone's attention. Confidential registry record Rowan Whitmore. The wax seal remained completely intact. Even the supervising archivists exchanged uneasy glances. No preservation record shows this envelope has ever been opened, one of them whispered. Damien turned the unopened envelope over several times. There was no sender's name, no filing reference, and no record number. Only Rowan's name written in elegant black ink. Whatever had been hidden inside had been deliberately removed from every official index. The room fell completely silent. Rowan looked at the unopened envelope without moving. For 23 years, he had believed every official record about his life had already been written, yet the document resting in Damien's hands suggested an entirely different truth. Damien slowly broke the ancient wax seal. He unfolded the first page. His calm expression disappeared almost instantly. Elias stepped forward. What does it say? Damien didn't answer. He looked directly at Rowan, still holding the document in silence. Everything we believed about your past, he said quietly, was a lie. Damien remained motionless. For several long seconds, no one inside the ancient vault dared to speak. The fragile document rested open in his hands. Elias slowly stepped closer, reading the faded pages over Damien's shoulder. His expression froze. This cannot be real. Rowan looked between them, uncertainty growing with every passing heartbeat. What does it say? Without answering immediately, Damien carefully turned the document toward him. Across the top, beneath the original seal of the Bloodline Tribunal, elegant handwritten letters filled the page. Original Bloodline Assessment Rowan Whitmore Classification. Resonance Omega Registry Status. Mandatory National Protection. The words seemed to drain every sound from the chamber. Rowan stared silently at the page. For years he had believed the official assessment, describing him as insignificant, had always been the truth. Now another version existed. The original one. Elias carefully separated the second document, hidden beneath the first. At first glance, it looked identical. The same paper, the same official seal, the same registry format. Then his eyes reached a single altered paragraph. Classification revised, negligible influence potential. A different authorization appeared beneath the amendment. Silas Voss. No one spoke. Damien continued sorting through the remaining papers inside the envelope. Several confidential letters slipped onto the stone table. Each carried tribunal security markings. Each documented private correspondence between Silas Voss and Victor Whitmore years before Rowan's political marriage had ever been arranged. The agreement was unmistakable. Rowan's authentic registry assessment would quietly disappear. In return, the Whitmore syndicate would retain uncontested succession rights without interference from a protected resonance heir. Everything suddenly made sense. The years of neglect, the impossible bloodline assessment, the whispers, the isolation, the endless reminders that he had no value. None of it had happened by accident. He had never been forgotten. He had been erased. Finally, Damien gathered every document into a single folder before looking toward Elias. Prepare certified copies. Elias nodded once. I'll have them ready before dawn. The originals stay with us. Damien closed the folder. No one buries the truth again. The supervising archivist exchanged solemn glances before applying emergency preservation seals to every recovered document. Before dawn, certified copies had already been delivered under tribunal emergency procedure to the office of the High Arbiter. The evidence recovered from the Master Bond Registry could no longer remain hidden. Within 48 hours, the Bloodline Tribunal convened an extraordinary public session attended by PAC leaders, legal scholars, registry officials, and representatives from every recognized Mafia syndicate in the region. Instead of another private legal dispute, the hearing became a defining moment for the future of Alpha and Omega Society. Elias Mercer carefully presented the original Bloodline certificates, the preserved journals of the founding registry, and the authentic assessment proving Rowan's resonance heritage had been intentionally concealed. Independent historians confirmed the documents were genuine, while registry archivists verified that the original seals matched records preserved for generations. When questioned under tribunal procedure, Silas Voss could not explain why the authentic assessment had disappeared from public archives while the altered version had become official law. The investigation expanded rapidly as additional registry offices compared their preserved duplicates against the newly recovered originals. The pattern became impossible to deny. Over many years, administrative authority had quietly replaced independent verification, allowing fabricated bond certifications and manipulated inheritance claims to influence decisions that affected countless Alpha and Omega families. Victor Whitmore also faced formal examination after. Correspondence revealed he had knowingly accepted the altered records to secure uncontested leadership within his own syndicate. Neither man could dismiss the written evidence now preserved inside the master registry under continuous public observation. For the first time in decades, the tribunal ruled that authority over the bond registry must never depend upon a single official or political faction again. A commission representing alphas, betas, omegas, historians, and independent legal experts would oversee future certifications together. The forgotten protections once granted to resonance bloodlines would be restored, not as privileges, but as safeguards ensuring that authentic bonds could never again be replaced by convenient paperwork. Rowan listened quietly as the ruling was announced. He had spent most of his life believing he existed only to be overlooked, yet the ability his family had hidden became the very reason the legal system found its balance again. After the hearing concluded, Damien approached him beneath the marble steps of the tribunal. "You changed more than one verdict," he said with a gentle smile. "You reminded every pack that truth deserves witnesses." Rowan looked across the city where countless people continued their ordinary lives, unaware that the laws protecting them had just begun a new chapter. "I only wanted people to stop fearing what they could not understand." Damien answered without hesitation. "Then you have already succeeded." Several months later, the Ashcroft estate hosted a gathering unlike any held before. Instead of celebrating political alliances or territorial agreements, representatives from every major pack came together to witness the signing of the new registry charter, a document guaranteeing transparency, independent review, and equal legal standing for every recognized Alpha, Beta, and Omega under bond law. Damien voluntarily surrendered several traditional powers previously reserved for ruling Mafia Alphas, arguing that lasting stability depended upon accountable institutions rather than inherited authority. Many considered the decision unprecedented, yet others recognized it as the natural conclusion of everything the recent crisis had revealed. As the ceremony ended, the guests remained for one final event requested not by the tribunal or the syndicates, but by Damien and Rowan themselves. They returned to the same historic cathedral where their political marriage had first been arranged. This time no negotiations waited outside the doors. No ceasefire depended upon signatures. No rival families measured advantage through legal obligation. Friends, colleagues, and former critics gathered simply to witness two people affirm a choice they had already proven through trust, respect, and shared purpose. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows as Damien and Rowan stood once more before the ancient altar. When they exchanged their renewed vows, the silver symbols engraved upon their ceremonial bands reflected the morning light with quiet brilliance. No extraordinary miracle appeared because none was needed. Their bond had already been recognized through the countless decisions that brought them there. Years later, students studying the history of modern bond law would read about the registry reform, the restoration of resonance verification, and the legal partnership that reshaped Alpha and Omega society. Most textbooks describe Damien Ashcroft as the first Mafia Alpha to willingly limit his own authority for the common good. They described Rowan Whitmore as the final documented heir of the Resonance bloodline who restored confidence in the Bond Registry. Yet those who had witnessed their journey remembered something even more important. Peace had not been secured because two powerful families signed an agreement. It endured because an overlooked Omega chose truth over resentment, and Alpha chose trust over pride, and together they proved that the strongest bond was never created by fear, politics, or tradition, but by the courage to recognize one another exactly as they truly were. If you were in their place, what choice would you have made? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy Alpha and Omega stories filled with love, sacrifice, heartbreak, and unforgettable second chances, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next journey.